So Lewis Hamilton has won the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. Hello, welcome all. Welcome back to the Football Van Zone. Today I'm going to have a little look at the what was an incident-packed Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia over the weekend, which the race was eventually won by Lewis Hamilton, which means we go into the last race next weekend in Abu Dhabi, all square, everything to play for. And when I say all square, I mean Hamilton and Verstappen, the fights for the title, the World Championship title, the World Championship Drivers title. Both drivers are level in points going into the final race. So it is quite literally a winner takes all, or to be more specific, whoever finishes in front of whom. So even if Hamilton finishes 9th and Verstappen finishes 10th, or Verstappen finishes 4th and Hamilton finishes 5th, or, whatever way you want to look at it, whoever finishes higher out of the two will win the race next week. The only exception to that would be a unique situation if both drivers failed to finish the race and both drivers scored 0 points. Then it will go down to race wins, and race wins, Verstappen has the edge with race wins and would therefore win the title based on race wins. A bit like goal difference, if you like, in terms of a football analogy. So as a result of this, Verstappen quite literally in the last few races has had nothing to lose. And we'll go into that when it comes to the instances, because I think a lot of these incidences over the last couple of races, when you consider the Brazil and you consider the 2 or 3 key instances yesterday, were a result of Verstappen's not needing to finish. Hamilton needs to finish. In fact, Verstappen himself he said 3 races ago, Hamilton needs to finish every race. He cannot afford to not finish, because he, of course, was behind and has been behind in the championship this whole time for the last several races. And it's true, because what that means is if Verstappen and Hamilton crash, it's bad news for Hamilton. It's not bad news for Verstappen, because Hamilton therefore can't gain any points. So as a result, Verstappen's driving style has been altered to that. It's been I'm going to put my car in this position, and if Hamilton hits me, Hamilton hits me. That means we're both out of the race, but he won't gain any points. I won't gain any points, but he won't gain any points. And so that is the attitude that Verstappen has had for the last few races, and that's why we've seen some really erratic driving. And when I say erratic, that is the term used by the stewards to describe a particular incident yesterday as well. But we'll come into that. So firstly, a bit of context in how the race started. So firstly, in qualifying, Hamilton finished first on pole. Verstappen was on an extremely hot lap. Fastest first sector, fastest second sector, gets the last bend. He's a couple of tenths up. He's going to take pole. And he pushed the car perhaps a little bit too much, hit the wall, the back end of the car hit the wall, and that caused him to not be able to complete the rest of that particular lap, and therefore he finished in qualifying in third. The start of the race then got underway, and it was a relatively ordinary start. There wasn't too much, particularly at the front, going on. We had Hamilton first, Bottas second, Verstappen third to start the race, and that's exactly how they came out of the first corner, and it's exactly how they were going for the first few laps until the first red flag. First red flag was caused by Mick Schumacher, who had lost control and put the car into the wall. Now, initially what happened was, and as anything, when the safety car gets deployed, as it was always going to be, Hamilton and Bottas both decided to come into the pits. They both came into the pits and get new tyres on, because it's obviously a cheap pit stop. For those who don't know Formula 1, if you're taking a pit stop under normal circumstances, it could be, say, a 20-second pit stop, for example. So you'll lose 20 seconds because all the other cars are going at full speed. However, during a safety car, if you change your tyres then, you don't lose 20 seconds because other cars aren't able to go at full speed. You lose more like 15 seconds, for example. And so whenever there's a safety car, often teams use that as an opportunity to get a cheap pit stop, fresh set of tyres and so on. And Hamilton and Bottas done just that. So they came out, and Verstappen, interestingly, didn't. And I think that was a gamble by Verstappen. And the reason why he done that was because he couldn't, if they'd pitted as well, they would have just come out and they would have been exactly the same situation as what they were before the red flag, which is in third place, finding it very difficult to overtake Bottas. We know the Mercedes are very quick at the straight line speed, etc., etc., etc. So they decided, you know what, let's take a gamble, let's keep Verstappen out. And it was a risk because if that had stayed like that, Verstappen would have had to have pit within. And actually, we saw his tyres by the time later on, but his tyres were actually quite. They were on the verge of going. They were in bad, a lot of blistering in a bad way. And Verstappen would have not lasted long after the restart from the safety car and with Hamilton behind him on a fresh set of tyres, it was purely a matter of time, and then Verstappen would have had to pit, and then God knows where he would have came out. So they took a gamble, and the gamble was that a red flag was called. Now, they circled a couple of laps behind the safety car, and then a red flag was called. And the red flag meant the race was suspended. So that means they all have to go back to the pits. And there, you can actually change the tyres. So Verstappen was able to change the tyres on the car without a pit stop at all. Which means, when obviously at the time of the safety car, under safety car conditions where it went into a red flag, Verstappen was first and leading the race. So at the restart, after the red flag, he was going to lead the race. It was a gamble by Red Bull, and it paid off. Some will argue about there's a few conspiracies, I'm not going to lie, about the fact that it took 2 or 3 laps behind the safety car before they decided actually we need to replace. And the reason the red flag was because they believed that the tyre wall where Mick Schumacher had crashed was damaged, and they needed to make repairs for that. And that they were going to have to get a crane out, and the crane would have to lift the stack of tyres out to put a new stack in. However, they didn't need to do that in the end. So a lot of people are wondering whether or not this was a conspiracy, because Verstappen was going to, if they didn't have the red flag, Verstappen was going to lose a lot of ground. And the title may well be not mathematically over, but if Verstappen have had to have picked in the next 5 laps or so, which he probably would have, he was going to come out quite far down the grid. The red flag led to a restart, and as from the restart, Verstappen started on pole. The restart wasn't particularly good for Verstappen. Verstappen was slow off the line. Hamilton got a very quick line. And from this graphic, and as much as I'd wish to be able to show you the footage, unfortunately I can't do that. However, I have got images to give you a rough idea of what's going on. So this is from the restart here. And as you can see, Hamilton is comfortably in front of Verstappen going down towards the first bend. As I said, Verstappen was quite late or quite slow on the restart. Hamilton was very quick. Hamilton, therefore, is taking the first corner very quickly. Then Verstappen, being Verstappen, I guess, decided that he was going to brake as late as he possibly could, which is what he done. And as a result, there was no way he could possibly keep his car from running off the end of the track. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Now, on this picture here, you can see where the end of the track, this is the first corner. Corner 1 going into corner 2. Or turn 1 into turn 2. And as you can see, and I've got a graphic highlighted there. This is where, after Verstappen had overshot he broke late, overshot the apex, went onto the runoff area, and then decided to rejoin the track. Now, the safe option is what I've marked here in the red arrow. That should be the option. That is what the drivers are expected to take as safe joining off the road. And the reason why is because it's like a slip road onto a motorway, for example. You have to join in a safe manner. And what Verstappen, as you can see the angle he's actually at here, what he's actually done. And here we've got another graphic here, and this will show you where his route actually was. And the reason why Verstappen had taken that route instead of the appropriate route was because he wanted to cut off Hamilton. That's all he thought. He didn't think, I better try and join his track, hope no one hits me. It's I'm going to cut off Hamilton. If he hits me, so be it. I'm going to make Hamilton have to go the long way round or take evasive action. That's his only thought there. That can be your only thought there. And there is an instance, I will come to that later, but there is an instance later on where Verstappen does use the correct way. So he does know what the correct way is. And it's not a sudden rush, I need to get back on track. He knows what he's doing. He's a very experienced Formula 1 racing driver racing for the World Championship. He knows what he's doing here. And as you can see here, that's the graphic of his actual route. Now, the next picture here is where Hamilton where Verstappen does indeed rejoin the track. And as you can see, just missing Hamilton, but Hamilton having to be forced rider. Bear in mind, Hamilton was on the track and on the inside line, on the racing line, and Verstappen wasn't. Verstappen, therefore, has to yield. The sporting regulations, which we'll come into, do stipulate exactly that. However, Verstappen has joined the race. He's gained an unfair advantage because he's overshot his mark, so he's come out in the leads. But he's also forced Hamilton wide, and as a result of that, Hamilton not only did he lose that place to Verstappen, but because he had to take evasive action, Ocon, who's just behind him in the blue car, was able to come up the inside and also go in front of Hamilton. So by the time this sequence of turn 1 and turn 2 are completed, Verstappen led the race, followed by Ocon, followed by Hamilton. So not long after this particular incident at turn 1 and turn 2, there was another red flag. So normally in race conditions, they would go off and then the stewards would have a look. And in this particular case, I think what the stewards would have, or certainly the race director would have done, would have asked the team principal from, or the team race engineer from Red Bull to give the place back. And he would have had to give the place back to Hamilton, and because it would have meant he would have basically had to have let Ocon pass to let Hamilton pass. He couldn't have not let, because Ocon was between them. And however, there was the unusual event of before that was able to take place, a red flag being issued. And so therefore this was another incident involving 2 or 3 cars, Mazepin, Perez, etc. And but nevertheless, red flagged the race, back into the pits they go, and because of that, there was going to be another standing start. And it was a case of, right, how are we going to order this, because of the fact that Verstappen was going to have to yield a place, and so the race director basically had offered the opportunity to Red Bull, said, look, are you going to give those places back? Perhaps you should start lower down the grid, starting in 3rd place. And Red Bull at first, they said, well, we need to have a look at it first before we can accept your offer, etc., etc. Now, the offer was basically a case of either you accept this offer and you go to 3rd, or we can refer it to the racing stewards. The stewards can decide. And then it's a gamble, because the stewards could say, well, actually, you know what, there wasn't much Verstappen could do, etc., etc., etc. Or it could be a case of actually Verstappen is and I think that what would have happened if it gone to the stewards, I think he would have been guilty on 2 or 3 of a different appendix. And that would have been firstly for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, and rejoining the track in an unsafe manner. And the penalty wouldn't have been a case of giving those 2 places back. It probably would have been more severe. I would hazard a guess, possibly as much as a drive-through penalty, because they can't give grid place drops during a red flag condition, because it's during the race. It's in the middle of a race. You can't reorder the grid during the race. The reason they were able to do in this particular case, because that was a voluntary thing, but there's nowhere in the rules where the FIA could say, you know what, when we restart the race, you're going to start here and you're going to start there, and so on. That was agreed between Alpine, Mercedes, and Red Bull. And so Red Bull eventually decided, actually, we will accept that. And I think, to be honest, they probably had to, because, like I said, they were looking at, if it went to the stewards, I'm confident that would have been a harsher penalty, which would have been more severe. So in the end, they start the race again, and this time Hamilton starts in second. Ocon starts first on pole. Hamilton starts second. Verstappen starts 3rd. Verstappen getting a much better exit into turn 1, and Ocon leads. Hamilton and Ocon have a little bit of a wobble, a little bit of a touch. Verstappen nips up the inside, and off Verstappen goes into turn 1 and into turn 2 and into the lead. Hamilton just about stays up behind Ocon, and so therefore the order after turn 2 is Verstappen, followed by Ocon, followed by Hamilton. And then Hamilton passes Ocon further down the race, and then he starts to race Verstappen. And now at this moment in time, they've got fresh sets of tyres on, but Hamilton's got the harder tyres on. Verstappen had the medium tyres on. Now, the medium tyres were always going to be a very strong push to get to the end. The hard tyres were expected to get to the end, the mediums weren't. And it was why Verstappen was able to get a good start, because he had softer tyres on. And however, it was always going to be a case of later in the race, was he going to have to stop to put another set of soft tyres on or something like that? But Hamilton did close the gap, and he did make a pass with DRS down the home straight. And then this happened. Now I'm having to go a little bit on basically the very limited video evidence from YouTube and whatnot, from the race highlights. But as you can see here, Hamilton had taken, and actually that doesn't do it quite as justice, but Hamilton down the pit straight was at least a car's length in front. The reason Verstappen is close there because he left himself much later on the brakes. Of course, he's on the inside line, which means he actually needs to brake a little bit sooner because it's a sharper bend on the inside, whereas on the outside you've got a softer turn to the left. Verstappen, of course, doing it as he normally does. The only thing he's thinking is going straight on. He's got no intention of making that first chicane at all. He's going to leave it as late as he can. He's going to put himself as wide as he can, and it's exactly what he does, because then he actually runs off the track again. And here we can see where he is. Again, he's got an opportunity there to spin round to the left. However, he can't because he's gone into far too deep, and his only intention there is to just continue straight on that angle onto the runoff area. His rear tyres actually did touch with Hamilton there. And bear in mind, Hamilton was in the lead going into the bend, so it's Hamilton's right-off way, essentially, and Hamilton was also on the racing line. And then, as you can see here, Verstappen went straight on. And as I said earlier about the exit, now look where Verstappen is coming off this time. He hasn't decided to pull off and go, come across. He's looking at, Hamilton's obviously taking the shortest exit there. It's not a danger this time for Hamilton to join in that manner because there's no other cars around. It's not a standing start. They're miles clear of anyone else. It's a clear track, and Hamilton is able to safely join the track there. Verstappen, however, as you can see, is not joining the track at the earliest convenient in this particular occasion. He wants to join the track much further up and in a much better angle, so he's got a better exit. Hamilton from there still got to do the turn, where Verstappen's actually exiting rejoining the track. He's already passed the turn. So there's two things here that Verstappen has done. Firstly, he's forced another driver off the track, or what they call as crowding. The second thing he's done is actually gained an unfair advantage as a result of those actions as well. As a result of this, he was asked again to yield the place back, and also a 5 seconds penalty was imposed, and that was because of the fact that this wasn't the first incident. Then after that, there appeared to be some confusion within the Mercedes camp in particular, but the FIA had, the race director, Michael, for the FIA race director, Michael had asked or given orders to Red Bull to allow Hamilton to retake the position because Verstappen had gained that advantage unfairly. Hamilton had gone past him, and Verstappen had clearly gained an unfair advantage by using the runoff area as you see from the pictures. However, what Verstappen then tried to do was strategically give the place back. And so in this particular picture here, you can see Hamilton coming up behind Verstappen. Verstappen had slowed up quite a bit at this point. And Hamilton also had slowed up behind Verstappen. And at the time, Hamilton did make contact in the end with Verstappen, with the front of Hamilton's car had hit the back of Verstappen's car. There was a little bit of wing damage to Hamilton's car. Could have been a little bit damaged possibly to the back of Verstappen, but it was a 50-50 thing in terms of damage, if you like. One had a bit of damage to the front, one had a bit of damage to the back. Hamilton then proceeded to complain that Verstappen had brake tested him, that he'd put in the brakes too quickly, and he wasn't sure what was going on. And what actually, as it transpired, was Verstappen was trying to yield the place back to Hamilton. Now, some will say, well, that's Hamilton's fault. He should have seen that and so on. Hamilton wasn't told at this point, and the FIA confirmed that Hamilton at this point was unaware that Verstappen was yielding the place. However, and I would argue this, Hamilton said, I didn't know what's going on and so on. Normally, you would just, it could have been that Verstappen had an engine failure and was slowing down or something like that, and Hamilton normally would have gone straight past. But we know why Hamilton didn't go past, and that was because the very crucial thing at the end of this particular straight is the DRS activation line. And so Verstappen was clearly making sure that Hamilton got past him on this particular straight. So Verstappen had DRS down the main straight, so he could give himself a better opportunity to retake the lead. And Hamilton was obviously a case of, no, you don't. You can cross that line first because you're going to yield a place back to me on the home straight. Arguably, that would have been the safest thing to do, but Verstappen obviously was trying to be strategic here. Some will argue it's a little bit unsporting. I would probably put it in the sporting. Probably was a little bit unsporting, but needless to say that Verstappen had slowed down considerably. We weren't sure how much, and we won't, not until later, until the stewards had intervened anyway. But this particular incident led to Hamilton going into the back of Verstappen, and as a result, Verstappen then had to give the position back later on in the race. And in this particular case, in the second attempt to give the position back, Hamilton did go past Verstappen. However, it lasted for not even a corner because Hamilton went to go up past him. Verstappen cut down the inside, let Hamilton get just enough in front so he could say he was in front, and then cut down the inside and then actually forced Hamilton wide again into the next corner, and Verstappen had retaken the lead. Red Bull's race engineers were straight onto Verstappen saying, "Look, mate, you can't do that." I mean, I can't remember the exact quote, but don't quote me on that. But it was sort of along the lines of, "Look, mate, you can't do that." And again, Verstappen then had to, for the third attempt, give the position over to Hamilton, a position that was rightly Hamilton's because Verstappen had already committed an offence of which he'd received a 5-second penalty for. So in the end, that did happen, and once Hamilton did get past Verstappen, Verstappen's tyres were absolutely spent, and Hamilton sped off, and he ended up winning the race actually quite comfortably. Verstappen's tyres had gone, and Hamilton also got the fastest lap. Now, Verstappen couldn't go on, and I mean, normally in a case like this, he would have quite a big gap, and he did have a big gap, about 24 seconds back to Ocon in third. And normally you'd come in, get a fresh set of tyres on, and you take second place, but you go out, set the fastest lap. However, he was unable to do that because of the 5-second penalty, because the pit stop plus the 5-second penalty that he was going to have would have meant he would have come out behind Ocon, so he couldn't go in and put fresh tyres on. So he had to finish the race on his very well-worn, dirty, medium compound tyres. And as a result, he finished the race quite slowly, in all fairness. And to be honest, I think a lot of people accept, and to be fair, I think Red Bull have also accepted that had Verstappen not have given the place back to Hamilton, Hamilton would have taken it anyway. He had once Hamilton got past Verstappen, he went and set fastest lap after fastest lap. Clearly a lot faster than Verstappen, and Verstappen's tyres had gone. We know that also before the radio messages that were sent out. Now, the incident in terms of the brake test by Verstappen on Hamilton led to an investigation after the race. So they announced during the race they would investigate that particular incident after the race. And after the race, when both drivers had been on the podium, etc., they were both summoned separately to the steward's office, and they were, let to go and give evidence, and so on. And then, as a result of that, Verstappen was then given a further 10-second penalty because of, and I'll quote the regulations in a minute. Because of that incident, he got a further 10-second penalty. In fact, let's have a quick look at what the quote actually was from the FIA. So the FIA, having handed a 10-second penalty, released this statement. At turn 1, the driver of car 33, Verstappen, was given the instruction to give back a position to car 44, Hamilton, and was told by the team to do so. Strategically, car 33 slowed significantly at turn 26. Continued. However, it was obvious that neither driver wanted to take the lead prior to the DRS detection line 3. The driver of car 33 stated that he was wondering why car 44 had not overtaken, and the driver of car 44 stated that, not having been aware at that stage that car 33 was given the position back, was unaware of the reason why car 33 was driving so slowly. In deciding to penalise the driver of car 33, the key point of the stewards was that the driver of car 33 then braked suddenly, 69 bar, and significantly resulting in a 2.4 G deceleration. Whilst accepting that the driver of car 43 could have overtaken car 33 when the car first slowed, we understand why he and the driver of car 33 did not wish to be the first to cross the DRS line. However, the sudden braking by the driver of car 33 was determined by the stewards to be erratic, and hence the predominant cause of the collision, and hence the standard penalty of 10 seconds for this type of instance is imposed. Verstappen was therefore found to have breached Article 2, Chapter 4, Appendix L of the FIA International Sporting Code, but keeps his second place finish and enters the season finale level on points with Hamilton. So that is sort of explains what they've. Bear in mind, they've seen all the data. The FIA have seen all the data, not just the video footage, but they would have all the telemetry. They'll know exactly when he's accelerated, when he's broke, etc., 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 how quickly he shifted down the gears, and so on and so forth. And a 2.4G slow up, 2.4G force of braking is quite a significant brake. That is a real if you're in a road car, for example, that's quite a heavy foot on the brake. Not a slam, but quite a heavy foot on the brake. And bear in mind, these cars are going, in excess of 200 miles an hour. Maybe not at this particular time they weren't going 200 miles an hour, but I mean, even if they were going 100 miles an hour, which is slow for a Formula One car, it's a significant brake. And so, therefore, Verstappen has received a penalty as a result. A 10-second penalty. Bear in mind, he finished 16 seconds of eventual third place. Bottas means he actually finishes 6 points ahead of Bottas. However, and this is where, in my opinion, I think this is a lenient punishment, is because I can understand the 10 seconds as a typical standard punishment. However, this wasn't Verstappen's first punishment or first offence in the race. In fact, it was his third. Someone even argue it could have been his fourth, but certainly officially it was his third offence of the race. The first being the restart where he cut off the corner, joined unsafe, and then obviously took a lead when he was he had no right to do so. The second being where he forced Hamilton off the track. And then the third being the instance with the brake testing of Hamilton. So I thought 10 seconds was light given those circumstances. So the article that the FIA were alluding to was this: it is not permitted to drive any car unnecessarily slowly, erratically, or in a manner deemed potentially dangerous to other drivers at the time. And obviously with Hamilton behind him and slamming on his brakes, that was obviously that he's in breach of that particular rule. So that's the rules that the FIA are referring to as to why they've decided to hand a punishment to Verstappen. To give you a sort of an idea of the first incident, as we saw with the incident after the restart, where Verstappen had gained an unfair advantage and rejoined the track unsafely. This is what the Article B of the regulations say. Manoeuvres liable to hinder other drivers, such as deliberate crowding of a car. That's where, obviously, we know with Verstappen, where he's forced Hamilton wide by taking a much wider line than he needed, beyond the edge of the track, or any other abnormal change of direction are strictly prohibited. Any driver who appears guilty of any of the above offences will be reported to the stewards. So by rejoining the track in which he did, that was an unsafe and deliberate act, and as well as obviously the gaining of advantage by cutting a corner. So there's actually two different offences in one manoeuvre there by Verstappen. This is why the Red Bull accepted the offer, by the way, of Verstappen starting or restarting in third place behind Hamilton on the second restart, because of the third start, because of, if it went to the stewards, they would have taken it into consideration. I'm pretty convinced it would have been probably a drive-through penalty. And as I said about rejoining or leaving and rejoining a track, this is the article, I believe this is Article C in the Sporting Code. Should a car leave the track for any reason and without prejudice to 2D below, the driver may rejoin. However, this may only be done when it is safe to do so and without gaining any advantage. A driver will be judged to have left the track if no part of the car remains in contact with the track. So let's go back to the picture. And again, we look at the first picture there, and Verstappen has clearly, one, gained an unfair advantage, and two, look at the angle Hamilton is taking on that line. Hamilton has clearly had to come off his racing line there in order to avoid contact with Verstappen. So it's quite clear from that Verstappen has, one, gained an unfair advantage, and two, joined in an unsafe manner as per Article C of the International Sporting Code. Now, for some reason, this particular rule, this is Appendix or Article D, which says causing a collision if I can talk properly, repetition of serious mistakes or the appearance of a lack of control over the car, such as leaving the track, will be reported to the stewards and may entail the imposition of penalties up to and including the exclusion of any driver concerned. Now, the reason I'm surprised this wasn't applied was because Verstappen had done this more than one occasion. It clearly, and not just in this race, but in previous races such as Brazil, for example, where we know he deliberately forced Hamilton wide off the track there. And so for me, I'm surprised this particular rule wasn't also applied because Verstappen had clearly had issues all weekend, also all race, in terms of following the rules. Repetition of serious mistakes or the appearance of a lack of control of leaving the car, for example, or lack of control over the car. Well, if he's continue every time someone goes to it, literally the only time Verstappen ever runs off the track at the end is when someone's gone to overtake him. So therefore, that if he's going to do that every time, that could be deemed as a lack of control of the car, because he can't possibly have control because somehow he keeps overshooting the first turning. So I think the 10 seconds, to summarise again, was I thought it was obviously going to get to penalty. I don't think there was any danger of him not getting the penalty. The question is whether 10 seconds is enough. 10 seconds doesn't really change it. Well, it doesn't change anything. He finished second, he stays second. I think a 20-second penalty would have been more fitting, and I think that would have relegated him to third, I believe, or even fourth. But certainly it was... And as we go into Abu Dhabi, the final race, it's quite clear that Verstappen is fully aware that if he and Hamilton were to collide and both went out of the race next week, Verstappen is world champion. Because there's the worst that can happen would be Verstappen gets disqualified from that particular race. That's fine. He gets 0 points, but Hamilton's out of the race, he gets 0 points. And there's nowhere within the rules where you can add points onto Hamilton because Verstappen being an idiot. So, and I think they should have taken a harder stance and used these rules that are clearly he has broken in order to set an example and say, look, you are not going to do this next week. We're having a fair race. It's a big occasion. I can't remember the last time we had a situation like this where we had two drivers leveling points going into the last race. We want it to be a good spectacle. What we don't want is Verstappen with the mindset which we know he has, which is I'm going to put my car right into the danger area and I'm going to force Hamilton to have to miss me because he has to miss me. That's Verstappen's mindset. He has to miss me. He has to finish the race. I don't have to finish the race. If he crashes into me, he has to finish the race. And I don't want... And I can see a scenario next week where Verstappen, as we've seen several times in the last few races, as Verstappen was unwilling to be overtaken in any which way, shape or form. That he would rather have a crash than accept that he's been overtaken fairly. And interestingly, we've had quite a few pundits have had their input on this. And Martin Brundle, if I bring it up here, Martin Brundle actually said, I think Verstappen has got to think about his driving standards. They were too much today. They're aggressive, determined, feisty in racing, and then there's what we saw this evening, which was too much. That was Martin Brundle's thought on Verstappen. We've also got... Johnny Herbert saying, it puts a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth, stated Johnny Herbert. I think it shows that Max is willing to do, I think it shows what Max is willing to do to try and win the World Championship. I agree with Lewis. I love Max for what he does to the racetrack, but he really does push the limits, and sometimes he pushes them too much. I don't think if Verstappen was to cause an incident next week, which would result in him winning the championship because of Hamilton having to bow out the race, would you... Come on, there's a sporting way of doing things. Would you really be quite happy to sit there and lift your World Championship trophy and say, oh, I've really earned this, when you haven't, because your only way of doing it was to cheat, and that is what Verstappen has been doing. When you break these rules continuously, which he's been doing, he is cheating. I'm going to win it this way, where I'm going to make sure that you do not win this World Championship, even if I have to take you off the track. Verstappen's own words, Hamilton has to finish every race. That was a few races ago. So Verstappen knows that Hamilton has to finish the race. Verstappen doesn't need to finish the race. If Hamilton crashes out and Verstappen crashes out, No points lost for Verstappen. And as a result, he's been overly aggressive because he can be, because he's going, you know what, I'm going to put my car here. I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to force you to go around me. And I think the FIA, in my opinion, if they had taken the action which all 19 other drivers in Qatar, after the drivers' conference said should have been applied, a penalty should have been applied for Verstappen. Had that have happened, we wouldn't be in a situation now. It's like a child. If you allow a child to do things that they shouldn't be allowed to do, when you do eventually pull them up on it, say you can't do that, they'll refer back and say, oh, it was right this time, it was right that time. You know, and so it for me, they need to nip this in the bud, and that incident in Brazil was an opportunity to say, look, you can't do this. We know you'll get screwed what you're trying to do here. You can't do it. You're going to race fairly. However, that's not been the case. And that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you've enjoyed this little insight. Yeah, I'll see you all again soon, hopefully.